Sarah Mitchell wiped down the counter of the small cafe for the third time that morning, her movements automatic after 5 years of working the same routine. The copper kettle sat on a quiet street corner in Windsor, just close enough to the castle to catch the occasional tourist but far enough away to avoid the main crowds. At 28, Sarah had never imagined she would still be serving coffee and sandwiches, but life had a way of surprising people. The morning rush had died down, leaving only a few regular customers scattered across the mismatched tables. Mrs. Henderson sat by the window with her usual Earl Grey, reading the local newspaper through her thick glasses. The university student, James, occupied his corner table with textbooks spread around his laptop like a fortress of learning. These familiar faces gave Sarah comfort in her otherwise uncertain world. Everything changed when he walked in. The man was tall, probably in his early 30s, wearing a crisp uniform that Sarah recognized immediately. The red tunic, the bearskin, cap tucked under his arm, the polished boots that clicked against the cafe's worn wooden floor. He was a Queen's Guard from Windsor Castle. Sarah had seen plenty of tourists dressed up in cheap imitations, but this was the real deal. The fabric was too fine, the posture too perfect, the bearing too natural to be anything but authentic. He looked exhausted. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his usually immaculate uniform showed subtle signs of a long shift. When he approached the counter, Sarah noticed a slight tremor in his hands. "What can I get you?" Sarah asked, offering her warmest smile. The guard hesitated, glancing around the cafe as if checking for something. "Just a coffee, please. Black, no sugar." His voice was refined, educated, but Sarah caught the underlying fatigue. "Rough day?" she asked while preparing his order, unable to keep the concern from her voice. He managed a weak smile. "You could say that. Been on duty since 4 this morning. Protocol demands we maintain our positions regardless of circumstances." Sarah handed him the steaming mug, noticing how he wrapped both hands around it as if drawing warmth from more than just the coffee. "Well, you're welcome to sit as long as you need. No rush here." "Thank you," he said, and Sarah caught something in his tone, genuine gratitude mixed with something else, relief perhaps. The guard chose a table near the back, away from the window. Sarah watched him settle into the chair, his rigid posture finally relaxing for the first time since entering. He pulled out his phone, checking it nervously before setting it face down on the table. 20 minutes passed peacefully. Sarah served a few more customers, restocked the pastry display, and kept one eye on her unusual patron. He had barely touched his coffee, instead staring out the window with an expression she couldn't quite read. Worry, fear. She had worked in customer service long enough to recognize when someone was carrying more than they could handle alone. The cafe door chimed again and 3 men in dark suits entered. They weren't tourists. Everything about them screamed official business. Their eyes swept the room with practiced efficiency before settling on the guard in the corner. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. The lead man, middle-aged with graying temples and cold blue eyes, approached the counter. "Excuse me, miss. We're looking for someone who might have come in here recently. Military uniform, about 6 feet tall." Sarah glanced toward the back table where the guard sat frozen, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. Something in his eyes, a flash of panic, a silent plea, made her decision for her. "I'm sorry, but I haven't seen anyone like that." She lied smoothly. "Just the usual customers today." The man's eyes narrowed. "Are you certain? This is a matter of national security. We have reason to believe he came this direction." "I'm sure I would remember someone in a military uniform," Sarah insisted, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Have you tried the tourist shops down the street? Sometimes people dress up for photos." The 3 men exchanged glances. The leader placed a business card on the counter. "If you see anything, call this number immediately. And lying to government officials is a serious offense." After they left, Sarah waited a full 5 minutes before approaching the guard's table. He looked up at her with eyes full of gratitude and something else. Determination. "Why? Did you do that?" he asked quietly. Sarah sat across from him, keeping her voice low. Because you looked like someone who needed help. And those men... She shrugged. Something felt wrong about the whole thing. The guard leaned forward. My name is Michael Crawford, and you may have just saved my life. What's going on? Sarah whispered. Michael glanced toward the door, then back to her. I witnessed something at the castle, something I wasn't supposed to see, and now... He ran a hand through his dark hair. Now they want to make sure I never talk about it. What did you see? I can't tell you. It would put you in danger too. Michael's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen and his face went pale. They know I'm here. I have to go. He stood quickly, dropping money on the table. Thank you, Sarah. I won't forget what you did. Wait, Sarah called softly. But he was already heading for the back exit. She watched him disappear into the alley behind the cafe, her mind racing with questions. What had he witnessed? Who were those men really? And why did she feel like her quiet life was about to become very complicated? The business card lay on the counter where the man had left it. Sarah picked it up, reading the simple text, Department of Internal Security, with a phone number below. She had never heard of such a department, which somehow made it even more ominous. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah found herself glancing toward the windows every few minutes, expecting to see the dark-suited men return. The familiar routine of her job felt different now, charged with an undercurrent of tension she had never experienced before. She had no idea that her simple act of kindness to a stranger would set in motion events that would change not only her life but potentially the future of the monarchy itself. The secret Michael Crawford carried was bigger than either of them could imagine, and Sarah Mitchell had just become the most important witness in a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government. Sarah couldn't concentrate for the rest of her shift. Every time the cafe door opened, she expected to see either Michael Crawford or the mysterious men in suits returning. Her hands shook slightly as she made coffee, and she found herself dropping things, a spoon here, a napkin there. Mrs. Henderson noticed her distraction and asked twice if everything was all right. Just tired, Sarah replied, but her regular customer's concerned expression suggested she wasn't buying it. When 6 o'clock finally arrived, Sarah's manager, Tom Bradley, emerged from the back office with his usual end-of-day checklist. Tom was a decent man in his 50s who had inherited the cafe from his father. He believed in treating his employees fairly, which was why Sarah had stayed so long despite the modest pay. You seem off today, Tom observed, watching Sarah clean the espresso machine with unusual intensity. Everything okay at home? Sarah hesitated. She wanted to tell someone about what had happened, but Michael's warnings about danger echoed in her mind. Just one of those days, I guess. Tom nodded knowingly. Well, get some rest. Tomorrow's Saturday, so we'll be busy with the weekend crowd. Sarah finished her closing duties mechanically, her thoughts consumed by the day's strange events. As she gathered her purse and jacket, she noticed the business card still tucked in her apron pocket. The weight of it seemed disproportionate to its size. The walk home took her through Windsor's historic streets, past centuries-old buildings that normally filled her with a sense of peace. Tonight, every shadow seemed threatening, every footstep behind her suspicious. She quickened her pace, keys ready before she reached her small flat above the bookshop on Park Street. Once inside, Sarah double-locked her door and drew the curtains closed. She made herself a cup of tea with trembling hands and sat at her small kitchen table, staring at the business card. Department of Internal Security. The name sounded official enough, but something about those men had felt wrong. The way they moved, the coldness in their eyes, the subtle threat in their leader's voice. Her phone rang, making her jump so violently she nearly knocked over her tea. The caller ID showed an unknown number. Hello? She answered cautiously. Miss Mitchell? The voice was crisp, professional, unfamiliar. This is Commander Harrison from Windsor Castle Security. We understand you may have had contact with one of our personnel today. Sarah's mouth went dry. I'm not sure what you mean. A guard named Michael Crawford. We have reason to believe he visited your establishment earlier today. This is a routine inquiry. Guardsman Crawford has been under considerable stress and we're concerned for his well-being. The explanation sounded reasonable, but something nagged at Sarah. I serve a lot of people every day. I can't remember everyone who comes in. Of course. But you would surely remember a man in full ceremonial uniform. It's quite distinctive. Sarah closed her eyes, weighing her options. I'm sorry, but I really can't help you. Perhaps you should try other businesses in the area. There was a pause. Miss Mitchell, I want to be very clear about something. Guardsman Crawford is potentially dangerous. He's been exhibiting signs of mental instability and has made concerning statements about threats to national security. If you have any information about his whereabouts, it's your duty as a citizen to share it. I understand, but I haven't seen anyone matching that description, Sarah insisted, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. After she hung up, Sarah sat in the growing darkness of her flat, her mind racing. Two different groups of people, looking for Michael, both claiming official authority. But their stories didn't quite match. The men in the cafe had spoken of national security as if Michael was a threat to it. The commander on the phone suggested Michael was making false claims about threats. Unable to sit still, Sarah grabbed her laptop and began searching for information about Michael Crawford. She found several Michael Crawfords online, but none appeared to be Queen's Guards. She tried searching for recent news about Windsor Castle, the royal family, anything that might give her a clue about what Michael had witnessed. Most of the recent stories were routine: royal engagements, ceremonial, duties, tourist information. But buried on page 3 of a search result, she found a small item in a local newspaper from 2 days ago. Windsor Castle staff changes prompt security review. The brief article mentioned that several long-serving castle employees had been reassigned or had taken early retirement following a routine security assessment. It was the kind of non-story that typically filled space in local papers, but given recent events, Sarah read it 3 times. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The coffee shop girl, Park Street flat. Thank you for earlier. Need to talk. Tomorrow 7 a.m. Children's Playground, Windsor Great Park. Come alone. Trust no one else. Sarah stared at the message for a long moment before deleting it. Michael Crawford had found her personal information somehow, which should have been frightening. Instead, she felt a strange mix of relief and anticipation. At least she would get answers. Sleep came fitfully that night. Sarah dreamed of men in dark suits chasing her through the narrow streets of Windsor, their footsteps echoing off ancient stone walls. She woke several times, each time checking her locks and peering through the curtains at the empty street below. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzly, typical English weather that matched Sarah's mood. She dressed in jeans and a waterproof jacket, telling herself she was just going for a morning walk. The playground in Windsor Great Park was a 20-minute walk from her flat, through areas she knew well from childhood. At 10 minutes to 7, Sarah reached the edge of the playground. It was deserted except for a lone figure sitting on one of the swings, head down, shoulders hunched against the light rain. Even in civilian clothes, dark jeans and a navy sweater, she recognized Michael Crawford immediately. Sarah approached, cautiously, her footsteps muffled by the damp grass. Michael looked up as she neared, and she was shocked by the change in him. The composed guardsman from yesterday had been replaced by someone who looked like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes darted constantly to the trees surrounding the playground, and his hands couldn't seem to stay still. "You came," he said, relief evident in his voice. "I wasn't sure you would." Sarah sat on the swing next to his, the cold chain biting through her jacket. "You said you needed to talk. People have been calling me, looking for you." Michael nodded grimly. "Commander Harrison?" "Among others." "Michael, what's really going on? What did you see at the castle?" Michael was quiet for so long that Sarah wondered if he would answer at all. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. 3 days ago, I was on duty at the state entrance. Late shift, nearly midnight, I saw something I shouldn't have seen. Someone I shouldn't have seen." He paused, checking their surroundings again. There was a meeting. Very unofficial, very secret. People who should never be in the same room together. What kind of people? Government officials, foreign contacts, and... Michael swallowed hard. And someone from the royal household, someone very high up. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. What were they discussing? I couldn't hear everything, but I caught enough. They were planning something that would change everything. Michael's hands clenched into fists. The next morning I was reassigned, told my services were no longer required at the state apartments. When I tried to report what I'd seen through official channels, I was told to forget it, for my own good. So you ran? I was going to. But yesterday, I overheard two of my colleagues talking. They mentioned a Sarah Mitchell who worked at a coffee shop, said she was asking too many questions about guardsmen, that she might be a security risk. Michael looked directly at her. They were planning to pay you a visit, to make sure you understood the importance of discretion. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her simple act of helping a stranger had put her on someone's radar, someone with enough influence to have her investigated within 24 hours. What do we do now? She asked, surprised to hear herself say we. Michael's expression hardened with determination. We find out who's really behind this, and we stop them before they can complete whatever they're planning. Sarah and Michael spent the next hour walking through Windsor Great Park, staying away from main paths and speaking in hushed tones. The morning rain had stopped, but the gray clouds remained, casting everything in muted colors that matched their somber conversation. I need to know exactly what you saw, Sarah said as they paused near a small pond. Every detail you can remember. Michael glanced around before answering. The meeting was in the Lancaster room. That's a private chamber most tourists never see. I was doing a security check when I heard voices inside. The door was slightly open, so I stayed in the shadows. Who was there? 4 people. Sir Richard Pemberton. He's the Deputy Private Secretary to His Majesty. A woman I didn't recognize, but she spoke with an Eastern European accent. A man in an expensive suit who kept checking his phone, and... Michael paused, his jaw tightening. And someone I've served alongside for 3 years. Another guardsman. Sarah felt her stomach drop. One of your colleagues was part of this? Sergeant James Morrison. He's been at Windsor for 8 years. Completely trusted. Seeing him there was like discovering your brother is a stranger. Michael's voice carried a mixture of hurt and anger. They were discussing timing. Something about the event happening during the next state visit. What event? That's what I couldn't quite hear. But the woman mentioned maximum impact and irreversible change. Pemberton seemed nervous about it, kept saying they needed to be careful about exposure. Morrison was explaining security protocols, which positions would be unmanned at specific times. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. You think they're planning something during an official royal engagement? The German Chancellor is visiting next week. Full state dinner, ceremony, the works. If someone wanted to create an international incident. Michael didn't finish the sentence. They walked in silence for several minutes, both lost in thought. Finally, Sarah spoke. We need proof. Something concrete that we can take to the proper authorities. That's the problem, Michael replied bitterly. Who are the proper authorities? Sir Richard Pemberton has direct access to the king. If he's involved, who can we trust within the royal household? And if this goes higher up the chain? Sarah stopped walking. What if we're thinking about this wrong? You said Pemberton seemed nervous, like he was being pressured into something. What if he's not the leader but just another pawn? Michael considered this. The woman with the accent seemed to be calling the shots. She's the one who mentioned timing and impact. And the man in the suit? Money. He kept talking about transfers and accounts. I think he was financing whatever they're planning. Sarah pulled out her phone. I'm going to search for recent visits by Eastern European officials or business people. If we can identify the woman, maybe we can figure out her connections. While Sarah scrolled through news sites and official announcements, Michael kept watch. The park was beginning to fill with weekend visitors. Families with children, joggers, dog walkers. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that something significant might be brewing in the shadows of their historic town. "Here," Sarah said suddenly. 3 days ago, there was a private reception at the Hungarian embassy in London. Several Eastern European dignitaries attended, including... She squinted at the small photo accompanying the article. Dr. Elena Volkov, described as a cultural attaché from an unnamed Baltic nation. Michael leaned over to look at the picture. That could be her. Dark hair, sharp features, about 45. But if she's really a cultural attaché, why meet secretly at Windsor Castle? Because she's not really a cultural attaché, Sarah said grimly. Look at this. The same article mentions that Dr. Volkov was previously affiliated with several international consulting firms before her diplomatic appointment. That's usually code for intelligence work. Their discussion was interrupted by the sound of Sarah's phone ringing. The caller ID showed her manager's number. "Tom?" she answered, trying to keep her voice casual. "Sarah, thank God. Where are you? You need to get here immediately." "Why? What's wrong?" "I'm not scheduled to work until Monday." Tom's voice was strained. "Some men came to the cafe this morning looking for you. Government types. They said it was urgent they speak with you about a national security matter. When I told them you weren't working today, they asked for your address." Sarah's blood ran cold. "Did you give it to them?" "Of course not." "But Sarah, they weren't asking. They were demanding. And they had badges, official-looking documents. They said if I didn't cooperate, the cafe could face serious legal consequences. Tom, listen to me carefully. Don't tell them anything. Don't give them my address, my phone number, nothing. If they threaten you, call the local police." "Sarah, what have you gotten yourself into?" "I can't explain right now, but please trust me. And Tom, don't go to the cafe alone for the next few days. Take someone with you." After she hung up, Sarah found Michael watching her with concern. "They're escalating," he said. "That means whatever they're planning is getting close. Or we're getting close to exposing them," Sarah countered. "We need to get to that meeting location, the Lancaster room. There might be evidence there." Michael shook his head immediately. "Impossible. The security is too tight, and after what happened, they'll be watching everything even more carefully. Then we need another approach." Sarah was quiet for a moment, thinking. "What about Morrison? The guardsman you saw? If we could get him alone, maybe we could convince him to tell us what's really going on. Morrison's been like a mentor to me. If anyone could get through to him." Michael trailed off, hope creeping into his voice for the first time. "He lives in the barracks, but he has a regular routine. Every Saturday evening, he goes to the King's Head pub on Thames Street. Always sits at the same table, always orders the same meal." Sarah checked her watch. It was already past 10 in the morning. That gives us about 8 hours to figure out how to approach him without being seen. They spent the rest of the day planning, moving between different locations to avoid being tracked. Sarah used her knowledge of Windsor's back streets and hidden alleys, while Michael provided insight into security protocols and timing. By evening, they had a plan that was risky, but might work. As the sun set over Windsor Castle, painting the ancient stones in shades of gold and amber, Sarah felt the weight of what they were attempting. In a few hours, she would either have answers that could prevent a national crisis, or she would be in custody for interfering with matters far beyond her understanding. But looking at Michael, seeing the determination in his eyes, the steady resolve that had replaced yesterday's panic, she knew there was no turning back. Whatever was planned for the German Chancellor's visit, whatever conspiracy involved foreign agents and corrupt officials, they were the only ones positioned to stop it. The irony wasn't lost on her that a cafe worker and a disgraced guardsman might be the last line of defense for the British monarchy. But sometimes, Sarah reflected, the most important battles were fought by the most unlikely heroes. As they made their way toward Thames Street and the King's Head pub, Sarah felt a strange mixture of fear and excitement. Her quiet life was definitely over, but maybe, just maybe, she was about to become part of something that really mattered. The narrow street was crowded with Saturday evening diners and pub-goers, providing perfect cover as they approached the King's Head. Through the frosted windows, Sarah could see the warm glow of lights and the silhouettes of people enjoying their weekend. Somewhere in that crowd was Sergeant Morrison, a man who might hold the key to preventing an international incident. Sarah took a deep breath and stepped forward into the unknown. The King's Head was exactly as Michael had described, a traditional English pub with dark wood paneling, low beams, and the comfortable buzz of Saturday evening conversation. Sarah spotted Sergeant Morrison immediately, sitting alone at a corner table with a pint of bitter and what appeared to be fish and chips. He was a large man, probably in his early 40s, with the kind of military bearing that never fully disappears, even in civilian clothes. Michael had positioned himself at the bar where he could watch both Morrison and the entrance. The plan was simple. Sarah would approach Morrison as if by chance, strike up a conversation and try to gauge his involvement in the conspiracy. Michael would intervene only if necessary. Sarah ordered a glass of wine and took a steadying breath. She had rehearsed her approach during their afternoon planning session, but now, facing the reality of confronting a potentially dangerous man, her confidence wavered. Morrison looked up as she approached his table. His eyes were intelligent and alert, scanning her quickly before returning to his meal. "Excuse me," Sarah said, putting on her best customer service smile. "I work at the Copper Kettle Café, just around the corner. Aren't you one of the guards? From the castle? I'm sure I've seen you before." Morrison's expression remained neutral, but Sarah caught a slight tension in his shoulders. "I might have stopped by once or twice. You serve a good cup of tea. Mind if I sit? It's so crowded tonight." Without waiting for an answer, Sarah slid into the chair across from him. "I was just thinking, you must have such interesting stories. Working at the castle, all those state visits and ceremonies." "Not really," Morrison replied, but his eyes had sharpened with interest. "Mostly it's just standing around looking decorative." Sarah laughed, perhaps a bit too loudly. "Oh, I'm sure. It's more exciting than that. My friend Michael, he's a guard too, was telling me about some of the behind-the-scenes preparations for important visits." Morrison's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Michael? Michael Crawford. Lovely man, very dedicated to his duty." Sarah watched Morrison's face carefully. "Though I heard he's been having some difficulties lately. Work stress, you know how it is." Morrison set down his fork completely. When he spoke, his voice was lower, more serious. "Miss, I think you might be confused about some things." "Am I?" Sarah leaned forward slightly, because Michael seemed very concerned about something he witnessed, something involving people who shouldn't have been meeting together. The change in Morrison was immediate and dramatic. His entire demeanor shifted from casual diner to alert soldier. He glanced around the pub, checking exits and noting faces with practiced efficiency. "You need to stop talking," he said quietly. "Right now. Sergeant Morrison, if that's what's wrong, you don't understand what you're playing with." Morrison's voice carried an edge of desperation that surprised Sarah. "These aren't games, and these aren't people who make idle threats." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "Then help us understand. Tell us what's really happening." Morrison was quiet for a long moment, his internal struggle visible on his face. Finally, he made a decision. "Meet me outside the castle walls in 10 minutes. The long walk entrance. Come alone." "What about 10 minutes?" Morrison repeated firmly, standing up and throwing money on the table. "And miss, if anyone followed you here tonight, we're all dead." Sarah watched him leave, her mind racing. This wasn't going according to plan. She caught Michael's eye at the bar and nodded toward the door. They had agreed on signals for different situations, and this one meant abort and regroup outside. The long walk was a tree-lined avenue stretching from Windsor Castle toward the horizon, a perfect spot for a private conversation away from crowds and surveillance. Sarah and Michael arrived separately, approaching from different directions, as they had planned. Morrison was waiting in the shadows of the ancient oak trees, no longer the comfortable pub patron, but every inch the professional soldier. When he saw Michael, his expression hardened. "You should have come to me first," Morrison said without preamble. "Before running, before involving civilians, you should have trusted me." How could I trust anyone? Michael shot back. I saw you in that meeting, James. You were part of it. Part of what? Do you even know what you think you witnessed? Sarah stepped between them before the argument could escalate. Someone needs to explain what's happening because right now we're all operating on assumptions and fear. Morrison looked at her for a long moment, then at Michael. What exactly did you see that night? Michael recounted the scene in detail. The late-night meeting, the participants, the fragments of conversation about timing and events. Morrison listened without interrupting, his expression growing increasingly grim. You saw about 10% of the truth, Morrison said finally, and drew completely the wrong conclusions. Then tell us the right conclusions, Sarah demanded. Morrison sighed deeply. 3 months ago, British intelligence intercepted communications about a planned attack during the German Chancellor's visit. The target isn't the Chancellor, it's the King himself. Sarah felt the ground shift beneath her feet. What? A group calling itself the New Republic has been planning to assassinate His Majesty during the state dinner. They believe removing the monarchy will spark a revolution that spreads across Europe. Morrison's voice was steady, but his hands were clenched. The meeting you witnessed wasn't conspirators planning the attack. It was security officials planning to stop it. Michael stared at him. But the woman with the accent, Dr. Elena Volkov, is British intelligence specialized in Eastern European revolutionary groups. She's been undercover for 6 months, infiltrating the New Republic cell. Morrison turned to Sarah. And, Sir Richard, Pemberton has been coordinating the security response while maintaining absolute secrecy to avoid tipping off the conspirators. Then why was I reassigned? Michael asked. Why the secrecy and threats? Because the New Republic has infiltrated multiple levels of government and security. We don't know how high up the corruption goes, so the operation is being run by a small group of completely trusted individuals. Morrison's expression softened slightly. Your reassignment wasn't punishment, Michael. It was protection. They were moving you away from potential danger. Sarah's head was spinning. But what about the men who came to my cafe, the threats? What men? Morrison's alertness returned instantly. Sarah described the 3 men in suits, their questions about Michael, their intimidating manner. Morrison's face grew increasingly troubled as she spoke. Those weren't our people, he said flatly. Government agents don't operate that way, and they certainly don't threaten cafe workers. Morrison pulled out his phone. How did they know to look for Michael at your shop? I don't know. They just said they were tracking him. Morrison was already dialing. Sir? It's Morrison. We have a problem. The Crawford situation has been compromised. Yes, sir. Multiple contacts with civilians. No, definitely not our people. While Morrison spoke in low, urgent tones, Sarah and Michael exchanged glances. The relief of learning they weren't facing government corruption was tempered by the realization that they were now dealing with something potentially more dangerous. Morrison finished his call and turned back to them. The men who visited your cafe were almost certainly New Republic operatives. They've been watching for any sign that their plot has been discovered. Which means they know about Michael, Sarah said. And about you, Morrison added grimly. By helping him, you've made yourself a target. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. What do we do now? Morrison checked his watch. The German Chancellor arrives in 4 days. Dr. Volkov believes the attack will happen during the state dinner itself, when security is focused on the official proceedings. He looked directly at both of them. You've stumbled into the middle of a counterintelligence operation that's taken months to set up. The safest thing would be to put you both in protective custody until this is over. No, Michael said immediately. I won't hide while my country is under threat. And I won't abandon Tom and my neighbors to worry about me, Sarah added. Besides, these people have already connected me to this situation. Running now won't change that. Morrison studied them both for a long moment. There is another option. The operation could use additional assets. People the New Republic doesn't know are involved. You mean help with the counter-operation? Sarah asked. I mean help save the king's life, Morrison replied. But you need to understand, If you agree to this, there's no going back. These people kill anyone who threatens their mission, and they've already demonstrated they know who you are. Sarah looked at Michael, seeing her own determination reflected in his eyes. 24 hours ago, her biggest worry had been whether the cafe would be busy enough on Saturday to make decent tips. Now she was being asked to help prevent the assassination of the British monarch. But as she thought about it, the choice wasn't really difficult at all. She had already chosen when she lied to protect Michael in her cafe. She had chosen again when she agreed to meet him in the park, and again when she approached Morrison in the pub. Sometimes ordinary people had to do extraordinary things, not because they were heroes, but because they were the only ones in position to act when it mattered most. The next 3 days passed in a blur of secret meetings, careful planning, and growing tension. Sarah found herself living a double life, maintaining her normal routine at the cafe while participating in briefings about a plot against the monarchy. The weight of the secret felt enormous, but she was surprised by how naturally she adapted to the deception. Morrison had introduced them to the core team. Dr. Elena Volkov, who was indeed everything Morrison had described, plus Commander. Patricia Hayes from Special Branch, and a man identified only as Davies from an unnamed intelligence service. The group met in different locations each time: a private room at a hotel, an empty conference room at a business center, once even in the back of a catering van parked near the castle. The New Republic believes they have the perfect plan, Dr. Volkov explained during one of these meetings, her slight accent more noticeable when she was focused. During the state dinner, there will be a toast honoring Anglo-German friendship. At precisely 9:15, when His Majesty rises to speak, a waiter will approach with what appears to be a replacement glass of champagne. The assassination will be carried out with a specialized poison, Davies added. Fast-acting, virtually undetectable until it's too late. The waiter will be in position because he's part of the regular catering staff, someone they've turned over the past 6 months. Sarah listened with growing horror. But surely the food and drinks are tested for poison. They are, Commander, Hayes confirmed. But this particular compound only becomes lethal when mixed with alcohol at body temperature. The champagne will test clean until the moment it enters the king's system. Michael leaned forward. So we know when and how. What's our counterplan? Morrison spread out a detailed floor plan of the state dining room. We can't simply arrest the waiter beforehand. That would alert the rest of the cell, and they'd either abort or switch to a backup plan. We need to catch them in the act while ensuring His Majesty's safety. Dr. Volkov pointed to specific locations on the plan. Sarah, this is where you come in. We've arranged for you to be part of the catering staff that evening. You'll be positioned to observe the waiter and signal when he makes his move. Sarah's stomach lurched. Me? In the castle? During a state dinner? Your face isn't known to the New Republic operatives inside the castle, Davies explained, and your background in food service makes you a perfect fit. You'll blend in completely. What about me? Michael asked. You'll be part of the security detail, but in plain clothes, Morrison replied. If Sarah's signal indicates the assassination attempt is underway, you'll be positioned to intercept. Over the following days, Sarah found herself receiving intensive training in observation techniques, emergency protocols, and castle layout. She learned to identify faces from surveillance photos, memorized floor plans until she could navigate them blindfolded, and practiced hand signals until they became second nature. The most surreal part was the evening she spent learning proper service etiquette from the castle's head butler, a dignified man named Mr. Whitmore who had no idea why this particular temporary staff member required such detailed instruction. Remember, Miss Mitchell, Mr. Whitmore said as he demonstrated the correct way to present a glass. Service at a state dinner is an art form. Every movement must be precise. Every gesture must convey respect for the occasion. Sarah practiced until her arms ached, knowing that lives might depend on her ability to move through that dining room without drawing attention. Meanwhile, the investigation into the New Republic cell continued. Dr. Volkov reported that their communications indicated growing excitement about the event, with multiple references to it being the beginning of a new era for Europe. They truly believe they're starting a revolution, she told the team during their final briefing, which makes them extremely dangerous. People acting on ideological conviction don't respond to normal deterrence. The day of the German Chancellor's arrival dawned gray and misty, typical London weather that seemed to mirror the tension everyone was feeling. Sarah went through her normal morning routine at the cafe, serving regular customers who had no idea their friendly barista would be. Working in Windsor Castle that evening, Tom noticed her distraction. "You're somewhere else today," he observed while they prepared for the lunch rush. "Just thinking about some changes coming up," Sarah replied, which was true enough. "Well, whatever it is, you seem different lately. More, I don't know, focused. Maybe? Like you found something that matters to you." Sarah managed to smile. "Maybe I have." That afternoon, Sarah reported to the castle's service entrance, where she was issued a uniform and assigned to the wine service team. The other temporary staff members were friendly, but focused on their own responsibilities, making it easy for Sarah to blend in while memorizing faces and positions. The state dining room was magnificent, a vast space with soaring ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and artwork spanning centuries. Tables were set with priceless china and silver. Flowers were arranged with mathematical precision, and every detail reflected the importance of the occasion. Sarah found her assigned position near the serving station where wine glasses were prepared for service. From here, she could observe the entire room while appearing to focus on her duties. Michael was somewhere in the crowd of security personnel, though she hadn't spotted him yet. As evening approached and guests began arriving, Sarah felt her nerves steadying into the kind of focused calm she imagined soldiers must experience before battle. Everything they had planned and practiced was about to be put to the test. The German Chancellor arrived precisely on schedule, accompanied by his delegation and received by the king with full ceremonial honors. Sarah watched from the service area as the formal procession moved through the castle's staterooms toward the dining room. At 8:30, dinner service began. Sarah moved through her assigned duties with practiced efficiency, serving wine and observing everything around her. The conversations were in multiple languages. The atmosphere was warm and diplomatic, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But as 9 o'clock approached, Sarah noticed increased activity near the main service entrance. Additional waiters were arriving, not unusual for such a large event. But she recognized one face from the surveillance photos Davies had shown her. Thomas Kerr, the compromised waiter, had just entered the dining room. Sarah caught sight of Michael near the far wall, his position allowing him to monitor multiple exits. She made the subtle hand signal they had practiced, touching her earring while appearing to adjust her hair. Michael's acknowledgement was equally subtle, a slight nod while he appeared to be listening to his radio earpiece. At 9:10, the king rose for the traditional toast honoring Anglo-German friendship. The room fell silent as he began to speak, his words carrying the weight of centuries of diplomatic tradition. Sarah watched Kerr moving through the crowd, a silver tray in his hands containing a single glass of champagne. His movement was casual, professional, completely unremarkable to anyone not specifically watching for it. But Sarah was watching. And as Kerr approached the king's position, she realized with crystal clarity that the next few minutes would determine not just the fate of the monarchy, but possibly the stability of an entire continent. The toast was building to its conclusion. Kerr was now less than 10 feet from the king, and somewhere in the room, other members of the New Republic cell were certainly watching, ready to ensure their plan succeeded no matter what. Sarah's hand moved to her collar, ready to give the final signal that would set their counter-operation in motion. In seconds, either they would successfully prevent an assassination, or they would all be dealing with consequences none of them wanted to imagine. Sarah's fingers touched her collar, the signal for immediate action. Across the room, she saw Michael begin moving, his casual stride carrying him toward Kerr's position with practiced precision. Other members of the security team, invisible until now, started converging from different directions. The king was reaching the climax of his toast, his voice carrying across the elegant dining room as centuries of diplomatic tradition played out before the distinguished guests. Kerr continued his approach, the poisoned champagne gleaming on his silver tray. But something was wrong. Sarah noticed it first, a second waiter approaching from the opposite direction, also carrying a single glass on a tray. This wasn't in any of their intelligence briefings. Her blood turned cold as she realized the New Republic had anticipated potential interference. They had 2 assassination attempts planned for the same moment. Sarah's training took over. She couldn't signal without alerting both waiters that the operation was compromised, but she couldn't let the second attempt proceed undetected. Making a split-second decision, she grabbed a wine bottle and began moving toward the second waiter, using the serving protocol she had memorized to justify her movement. Meanwhile, Michael had reached Kerr's position. In one smooth motion that appeared to be nothing more than a helpful gesture, he stepped between Kerr and the king, ostensibly to assist with crowd control for the toast. But Sarah saw him grip Kerr's wrist firmly, preventing him from extending the poisoned glass. The king raised his own champagne glass, completely unaware of the drama unfolding around him. "To the enduring friendship between our great nations," he declared, his voice resonating through the room. Sarah was now close enough to the second waiter to see his face clearly. Unlike Kerr, this man wasn't on any of their surveillance photos. He was older, probably in his 50s, with the bearing of someone accustomed to high-level service. But his eyes held the same fanatic intensity Sarah had learned to recognize in Dr. Volkov's briefings about revolutionary cells. The second waiter was now just steps away from the king's position. Michael was still dealing with Kerr, and Sarah realized with crystal clarity that she was the only person in position to stop the backup attempt. Without hesitation, Sarah stepped directly into the second waiter's path. "Excuse me," she said in her most professional voice, "but Mr. Whitmore needs you in the kitchen immediately. Something about the dessert service." The waiter's eyes narrowed. "I have a delivery to make first." "I'm afraid it can't wait," Sarah insisted, moving to block his advance while maintaining her cover as helpful staff. He was very specific about the urgency. For a moment, they stood in a silent standoff while the king's toast continued around them. Sarah could see the calculation in the waiter's eyes, whether to maintain his cover or force his way past her. He chose force. The waiter lunged forward, trying to push past Sarah to reach the king. But Sarah was ready. Using techniques Michael had taught her during their crash training course, she grabbed the tray and twisted, sending the poisoned champagne spinning away from the royal table. The glass shattered against the marble floor with a crash that cut through the king's speech, like a gunshot. Suddenly, the careful choreography of the evening exploded into controlled chaos. Security personnel materialized from seemingly nowhere, surrounding both waiters. Michael had Kerr in custody, while Commander Hayes and her team moved to secure the second assassin. The king, demonstrating the composure bred into the royal family, over generations completed his toast despite the commotion. To friendship, prosperity, and the triumph of democratic values over those who would tear them down. The room erupted in applause, though most guests remained unaware of how literally appropriate the king's words had been. Within minutes, both would-be assassins were in custody, and the dining room was being discreetly cleared by security teams. Sarah found herself whisked away to a private anteroom, where Davies was coordinating the immediate response. "Outstanding work," he told her as she slumped into a chair, adrenaline finally giving way to exhaustion. "The second waiter wasn't in our intelligence. Without your intervention," Sarah nodded weakly. "Is it over?" "The immediate threat? Yes. But we'll be spending weeks rounding up the rest of the cell." Davies studied her with professional interest. "You have excellent instincts for this work. If you're ever interested in a career change," Sarah managed a laugh. "Thanks, but I think I'll stick to serving coffee. It's considerably less dangerous." Michael appeared in the doorway, his formal security uniform replaced by civilian clothes. "How are you holding up?" "Better than I expected," Sarah replied honestly. "Is everyone safe?" "The king is fine, completely unharmed. The German chancellor's delegation has been briefed on the situation, and both assassins are talking. Apparently, the prospect of treason charges has made them very cooperative." Morrison joined them, his usually stern expression showing something that might have been pride. The intelligence they're providing is already helping us roll up New Republic cells across Europe. This was bigger than we realized. A coordinated attempt to destabilize multiple governments simultaneously. Dr. Volkov entered last, having shed her undercover persona for a more businesslike appearance. The organization is finished, she announced with satisfaction. Without their carefully planned, spectacular assassination, they have no way to inspire the revolution they were counting on. Over the following days, Sarah watched the story unfold in the media with surreal detachment. The official report spoke of a minor security incident during the state dinner that had been resolved without threat to any guests. The deeper truth, that the British monarchy had come within seconds of assassination, remained classified. Sarah returned to her normal life at the Copper Kettle, though nothing felt quite the same. Tom noticed the change immediately. "You seem different," he observed during a quiet afternoon. "More confident, maybe? Like you've discovered something important about yourself." Sarah smiled, thinking about his words. "I think I've learned that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they have to." Deep thoughts for a Tuesday afternoon. Tom laughed. "But I suppose that's true enough." The cafe door chimed and Sarah looked up to see Michael entering in civilian clothes. He had been reassigned to a position with higher security clearance, his role in preventing the assassination having earned him significant recognition within intelligence circles. "The usual?" Sarah asked as he approached the counter. "Actually, I was hoping we could talk. There's something I wanted to ask you." Sarah prepared his coffee, black, no sugar, just as he had ordered on that first day that seemed like a lifetime ago. "What's on your mind?" Davies wasn't entirely joking about that career change. "There's a position opening up, liaison work between different security services. It would use your observation skills, your ability to blend in, your instincts." Michael paused. "They specifically requested you." Sarah considered this as she handed him his coffee. The idea of leaving her quiet life for something more significant was tempting, especially after experiencing the satisfaction of making a real difference. "Would I still be able to work here sometimes?" she asked. "This place, these people, they matter to me too," Michael smiled. "I think that could be arranged. After all, what better cover for a security liaison than a part-time job at a local cafe?" As Sarah looked around the Copper Kettle, at Mrs. Henderson reading her newspaper by the window, at James surrounded by his textbooks, at Tom organizing inventory behind the counter, she realized that her ordinary life had prepared her for extraordinary circumstances in ways she never could have imagined. Sometimes the most important battles were fought by people who never intended to be heroes, who were simply in the right place at the right time with the courage to act. Sarah Mitchell had been a cafe worker who helped a stranger, and in doing so, had helped save a kingdom. The quiet cafe on the corner would continue serving coffee and conversation to locals and tourists alike, but now it would also serve as the occasional meeting place for people who protected that quiet normalcy from threats most people would never know existed. And Sarah would continue to be exactly what she had always been, someone who helped people when they needed it, whether they wanted a cup of coffee or something far more significant. 3 months later, when the official honors were quietly distributed to those who had prevented the New Republic plot, Sarah received a letter from Buckingham Palace, thanking her for her exceptional service to the crown. She framed it and hung it in her kitchen, next to a photo of the Copper Kettle staff at their annual Christmas party. It was, she thought, a perfect reminder that the most meaningful work often happened in the spaces between ordinary and extraordinary, where regular people chose to do whatever was necessary to protect the things they valued most.